Welcome to episode 15 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes. Now, when you head off on a long bicycle ride, you hope things don't go wrong, but inevitably they do. Punctures, broken spokes, getting lost, losing your money, perhaps even having something stolen. These are what Donald Rumsfeld referred to as the known knowns. He also referred to the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns.
Good evening. The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades, and this country is not alone. From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
That was the Prime Minister telling us all to stay at home for the next 3 weeks at least. I'm not sure where this pandemic sits in the Donald Rumsfeld quotation. I'm sure that the COVID-19 epidemic was a known known to many experts. But to the humble long-distance cyclist, such a pandemic was probably somewhere in between the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. So if you decided to set off cycling across Europe earlier this year, it probably never crossed your mind that when you arrived in France, this would happen.
Françaises, Français, mes chers compatriotes, jeudi soir, je me suis adressé à vous pour évoquer la crise sanitaire que traverse notre pays. Jusqu'alors, l'épidémie de Covid-19 était peut-être pour certains d'entre vous une idée lointaine. Elle est devenue une réalité.
But of course it did. The guest on this episode of the Cycling Europe podcast is Paul Gentle. On February 1st, the morning after the UK left the European Union, Paul set off to cycle the length of the continent, from Tarifa in southern Spain to Nordkapp in northern Norway. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thanks very much. It's good to talk to you, Andrew.
Well, yeah, it's good to talk to you too. I've been kind of following you online over the last couple of months, really, since you left southern Spain. But before we get into the journey itself, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Paul. I'm 41. I live in Bristol with my girlfriend here by the harbour side. I grew up about 10 miles south of this in North Somerset, so lots of good countryside for cycling. My day job, normally I work in IT. I've been contracting the last couple of years, which sort of presented this opportunity to take a break from work and do a bit of a cycling trip. I've always been into cycling. I used to go out with my dad when I was very young in the Somerset countryside, and lots of good cycling opportunities, lots of quiet country lanes. When I was a bit older, I'd go out with my friends. We were all into cycling as teenagers, and then a bit older again, we'd go out on rides, often incorporate pub stops, and there's so much sort of beautiful countryside to explore and a lot of cycle paths now as well. So I sort of got into cycling through that, really. And then when I was a bit older, we talked about going on a bit of a tour. The first one I did was Devon and Cornwall with one of my friends. We talked about it for years and years. And then we finally set off completely unprepared on sort of old mountain bikes we've had since we were like early teenagers, and we were sort of mid-20s then. Took far too much stuff, really unpractical things for cycling trips I now know. Didn't really know how to cycle day on day or handle the hills or anything like that, but we sort of soon found out the hard way, and yeah, that's how I got into it, really.
So was the journey from Tarifa to Nordkapp, was that the first time you'd cycled long distance abroad?
No, I'd done a few abroad, mainly in the UK. I cycled the length of Ireland from the most southerly point to the most northerly point there. Then I did a very short trip. The one I did first of all was Bordeaux down to San Sebastian over a week, which I think covers a bit of the ground you actually did on your Tarifa to Nordkapp journey. And then the biggest one I've done abroad, a cycle from Glastonbury, the festival there, to a festival called Ziget in Budapest. So Glastonbury to Budapest via Lyon. I wanted to take a detour to Lyon to watch the Tour de France that was passing through. So that's the sort of biggest one I've done abroad in 2013. It seems like a long time ago.
So you had quite a lot of experience before setting off. What made you decide to do the Tarifa to Nordkapp route?
I think I always wanted to do one sort of more big cycle ride before maybe I get too old to do it, or I don't know if you're ever too old, but always felt like I enjoyed the Budapest Glastonbury one so much that I'd always sort of planned to do another. The opportunity hadn't arisen. That route in particular, I guess I'd looked at a number of options. I was thinking about carrying on. When I went to Budapest, a lot of it was down the Danube cycle path, which was fantastic. And I looked at finishing off the Danube route and taking it all the way to the other end of the river, basically at the Black Sea. But the cycling conditions didn't look that great. I got a book on it, and I thought the first bit of the journey was really smooth cycle paths and really nice cycling conditions. And from Budapest onwards, it got a lot rougher and you'd be on the road a lot more. So I sort of ruled that out. I was thinking about going through Croatia and Albania like you did on your tour. I read about that. I was a bit put off by the road conditions and the traffic in Albania. So I was umming and ahhing for quite a long period of time. I mean, this went on years, and it was thinking of a route and then finding the sort of right opportunity in life to do it, building up the finances and building up the courage to do it. And in the end, I just thought, why don't I pick a load of places that I'd like to actually go and cycle and sort of make up some route out of it. So I thought I definitely want to go to Spain, explore more of that. We've been doing some Spanish lessons. I've always liked Spain, and I thought it'd be a good place to start in the colder months. When it's cold here, it's going to be warm at the bottom of Spain. So I was thinking, okay, start at the bottom of Spain and then head up. I wanted to see more of Eastern Europe. I've always enjoyed spending time there. Love Budapest and Hungary. Always wanted to go to Slovenia, and that looked really good for cycling. I'd read a few bits. I'm not sure if you've read Tim Moore's book. He's another sort of cyclist. He's a travel writer, really, but he's done a number of sort of cycling books in amongst other travel logs. And he cycles the Iron Curtain Trail down through Finland. I think he starts in Norway and then he goes down through Finland and then Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia. Sounded like a really interesting trip, so I thought I'd like to incorporate some of that. And then thinking about all these places, I sort of joined the dots and thought, actually, this route is pretty much covering the length of Europe from Tarifa to Nordkapp. So possibly I could aim to do that and incorporate all these places that I wanted to go. So that's how it came about, really. And I thought I'll start off at the bottom of Spain, and I won't actually tell anyone I'm going any further than France. So there's no pressure. If I can't handle it, if I'm not enjoying it, I can just give up. But then a few people said, well, where do you think you'll get to, like, realistically? Like, what's the furthest point you possibly could get to? And I sort of said, well, if all goes well and I'm enjoying it, I might even get to Nordkapp at the top of Norway. And as soon as I'd said this to a couple of people, they said it to a bunch of other people. They said, do you know he's cycling to Norway? And then it sort of got out of hand. And then it became like just taken that I was definitely going to cycle from Spain to Norway. And once everyone sort of started saying that, I thought, well, I've got to aim to do that. And that's got to be the mission.
Your planned route is certainly not a direct route. It takes you initially along the Spanish coast and then southern France, and then you go across Italy and then up through Eastern Europe. So, I mean, when I did it, my route was relatively direct, not the most direct, but it was relatively direct from Tarifa to Nordkapp. But certainly yours was a lot more round the houses. How many kilometres did you envisage it being?
I've got a feeling I only informally sort of worked it out, but I think it was coming out about 7,500 kilometres. Though, as you probably know from your cycling trips, that a lot of stuff you plan, when you actually do it in reality, it turns out being a lot more.
It wouldn't surprise me if you'd ended up doing nearer 10,000 actually, because mine was 7,700, I think. So I would imagine yours was probably going to be significantly more than that.
It wouldn't surprise me, Andrew. I mean, that sounds like it's very much in keeping with every plan I've made for every cycle tour before. I think it's going to be a certain amount of mileage, and it ends up being a lot more because I miscalculate. I was hoping with the cycling navigation app I've got now, it would sort of give me a more reliable picture, but then I was still working out routes, and it was coming up with a certain mileage, and then I'd actually do it and look at the end of the day and it would be more. I think you factor in the getting lost or get into a route and it's either too busy with traffic or it's too rough to cycle on, and then I choose to go somewhere else and take a bit of a detour. So you end up doing more than you plan. I've always done that. 10,000 is probably more realistic than 7,500. But
Now, the other thing that is interesting about the start of your trip is the fact that you set off on February 1st. Now, February 1st seems a long time ago now, bearing in mind everything that's happened since February 1st. But that was the day after the UK left the European Union. Was that a planned act of defiance?
I'd like to say it was, but it wasn't. I'd been planning this for years, really, and I came up with the sort of idea to do it in February, sometime before. I mean, it was the previous summer. I was conscious that I'd been talking about it for ages and hadn't done anything to do it and kept putting it off. So I spoke to my girlfriend and we sort of informally said, okay, well, 6 months from now is the start of Feb. So I'll aim to do that as a solid date. And obviously at that point, the Brexit deadline was supposed to be the 31st of October, I think. It might have even been before that, and it got delayed to the 31st of October. But certainly when I was in the thick of planning it and started looking at train times and like average temperatures in each place, I mean, I spent a lot of time looking at that because I didn't want it to be too cold when I had to cycle places. And when I was going through all that stage, we were thinking start of Feb and finish sometime in June when it would hopefully be warm enough in Nordkapp. So we didn't plan it around Brexit like that. When Brexit got put back to the 31st of Jan, I thought, damn it. I mean, that's right at the same time I was planning to start cycling. And there was sort of all worries at the time that it might cause travel disruption and getting into Europe and sort of queues at ports for getting on ferries, and the pound performing against the euro might take a bit of a dive. So it was all sort of like worries then. And I was thinking, well, is it the best time to do it? And then I did sort of think then, well, from a purpose of the trip and to give it some like meaning and some impact, it could be nice to sort of say, okay, the UK are leaving Europe, but I'm gonna be in Europe and I'm gonna sort of fully embrace it and look at Europe head on and cycle through and see what's great about Europe and make lots of good friends there, while the rest of the country, I don't know if turning his back on it slightly is the right phrase, but the UK leaves Europe and I'll be just starting to sort of enter it and cycle through it then. So it did, once I thought about it, I did think, okay, well, that gives it a bit of a story behind it and a bit of meaning. So let's go with the 1st of Feb, and then that gives it a sort of solid deadline for me to sort of get organised and actually like start booking stuff.
Yeah, because there's a fantastic picture that you posted to Instagram, and it's the sun setting over Tarifa, or over the Isla de las Palomas, just to the south of Tarifa. And you make the comment on the Instagram post that as the sun sets on Britain's membership of the European Union, here you are setting off across Europe. So I thought that was quite a nice moment.
I was the most southerly person in the most southerly bar or place you could get a drink in mainland Europe when the sun set then. So I thought that was, I mean, it's not something I'd really set out as an important thing, but then when I sort of was strolling along the front and I saw a bar open and thought if I get a beer there and I sit right there, they had some chairs on the beach. So I thought I'll sit there, watch the sun go down, and it'd be a nice sort of poignant moment and a sort of nice thing to do on the eve of the trip, really.
Perhaps when we rejoin the European Union in a few years to come, which I'm sure we will, you can go back and recreate the moment. But anyway, we're veering dangerously into politics, so let's talk about the cycle in Spain. Did you have a set route that you were following? Were you following any of the Eurovelos, for example? Were you following any local routes? Tell us about Spain.
Yeah, well, Tarifa was determined as the starting point when I thought about Tarifa to Nordkapp could be good for the overall route. In terms of a route from there, I was at first thinking about following the coast. I love the coast. I love being by the seaside. But that bit of Spain in particular seemed quite built up, maybe a bit touristy. You had Gibraltar, Malaga, Marbella. So I thought maybe I could go inland for a bit and then started doing some research, looked what was around there. I was aware of the Via Verdes from your own book and from reading a few other things. So I thought, I wonder if there's any of them around there, and looked at the map, and by lucky coincidence, two of the biggest in Spain seem to go diagonally north-east from where I was starting to where I wanted to go. I thought Valencia might be a good place to hit the coast again. I've always wanted to go to Valencia. It looks like a really interesting city. So I thought, okay, Tarifa, go inland for a bit and then come out on the coast again at Valencia. So it was as simple as that, really. And I plan to hit a couple of the Via Verdes, these sort of Spanish greenway cycle paths, a bit equivalent of the Sustrand cycle paths we've got in the UK. And up from there, it seemed like the quickest and easiest and possibly one of the most attractive ways up from Barcelona was to go follow the coast up, so I'm by the seaside for a bit, go through Barcelona. I've got a friend who's moved to Barcelona, so it'd be a good opportunity to visit him and catch up with him, and then over the border into France. So that was as informal as the original plan came from, and then obviously bulked out the details when it got closer to the time and I looked at individual stages.
I cycled that route, which was, I think, in the end, very similar to your route when I did my Mediterranean route. And I got as far as Valencia and then realised I was running out of time and then headed inland to get to Seville and then, in my case, Cape St. Vincent in Portugal as soon as I possibly could. I was delighted, like you were, to find the Vias Verdes routes, which are, most of them are disused railway tracks, but I had a real love-hate relationship with them. Some of them were fantastic, but some of them I found the surface quality was actually quite difficult. How did you find them?
Exactly the same, really, and I don't think they've changed much in the intervening years. I think it was some bits I got on the cycle path and it was just immaculate. I mean, it was an absolute dream. It was really sort of smooth surface, tarmac, loads to see, all these tables dotted around with taps occasionally. And you were thinking, wow, this is heaven for cycling. And then you'd suddenly, without warning, either hit a bit of a detour that took you on the main road, or the surface would completely deteriorate. There'd be some potholes, or there'd be large, like pebble-like stones, which made it very difficult to cycle on. I'm not sure what the criteria is to class something as a Via Verde or cycle path, but it seemed in part that some bits were probably okay for the more extreme touring bikes, verging on mountain bikes, but not really suitable for a more traditional touring bike like mine with a bit thinner tyres. The disappointing thing was as well, when you hit those surfaces, it's not so much that it makes it difficult and unpleasant, It was more that I'd spent a lot more time looking down at the floor to avoid large rocks and potholes, and wasn't looking at the scenery, which defeated the whole object of doing it, which was a real shame. But probably like at least 50% of it was lovely. It was really nice, smooth surfaces. They'd obviously worked hard to make that as pleasurable as possible. I don't know what happened to the rest of it. I guess maybe they'd run out of funds or planning permission to improve certain sections, and hopefully they make the rest of it as top quality as the sort of really good cyclable bits that I was on. If the whole route is made as good as the best bits in the future, it'd be a dream for miles and miles to cycle on.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I'm just actually looking now at your Instagram account, which is European Uni Cycle 2020.
Yeah.
I would recommend anybody goes and has a look at it, because it's really stark, the contrast between the fantastic bits of the Vias Verdes and the bits which are actually quite difficult to cycle along. The other thing about them is that they are, as you said, disused railway lines, and they're quite spectacular in themselves, because you've got these viaducts, you've got tunnels to go through, so they're actually quite fun things to cycle on, but at times quite difficult in terms of the terrain. The other thing is that by not going on the coast, you tend to go through some really beautiful out of the way towns. And again, I'm just looking at a picture of one of your pictures of Abeda, which was just a beautiful place.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, I was constantly startled by the amount of amazing, picturesque places along that route that largely by fluke I stumbled upon. I mean, I had the rough route, but these individual little villages, half of them I had done no research on and had no idea they existed. It was more a case of day to day, I would look at the route and see how hilly it was and what sort of terrain it was, and work out roughly where I could aim for that day and find accommodation in. And I'd often sort of do a bit of a search on some of the accommodation websites and see what was around in each area and just pick somewhere to head for, because it had some B&Bs or pensions or casas or whatever they called them, and sort of head there and then arrive at a place or see somewhere on the way that was incredible. And I was just constantly thinking, like, why is this area not more popular? There doesn't seem to be many people here, and you hear about the places along the coast that I mentioned, like Malaga, Marbella, and then Benidorm a bit further up, and you hear about people going there on holidays from the UK, but I've never even heard of a lot of these places. I don't really think I know anyone who's been to Andalusia before, and it's just stunning. It's just really interesting, village after village. Everyone's really friendly, food's really good, the weather's really good. And some of the towns, I mean, I'd see sort of little lakeside villages. I'd see villages built into rocks. Like it was just unbelievable. I mean, we've got like Cheddar Gorge not far from us here, this big rock that people flock from miles around to see. But there was a whole village built into like a cliffside like that. And there wasn't really, I appreciate it was out of season, but it was still really warm there, and there wasn't many other tourists around. It didn't seem to have much sort of fanfare to it, but I mean, it's one of the most interesting places I've ever been, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely. I was really amazed by how nice some of those little inland places were, and anybody who is sticking rigidly to the coast, if they're cycling along the Mediterranean, really is missing out on a treat by not just heading inland, at least occasionally, to discover some of them. You picked up on the accommodation there. You weren't carrying, as far as I know, you weren't carrying a tent. Was there no intention of camping anywhere along the journey?
I love camping on cycle tours. I've always camped before. When I went to Budapest, camped almost every night. Ireland camped every night. And I would have liked to, but I guess setting off at the time of year I did, I was conscious that even though it was pretty warm in the daytime in southern Spain and sort of going up along the east coast of Spain, it'd be pretty warm in the daytime, but the average temperatures looked like they got cold at night. And I'd done a bit of research, and it looked like a lot of campsites were shut for the winter still. So it looked like accommodations would be limited. I wasn't sure. I thought the south of France might be okay. There might be a few places open, but it could be doubtful. And then when I moved further north, conscious that it'd still be a bit chilly when I was hitting the sort of lower Eastern Europe. My sort of limited experience of cycling in Eastern Europe as well, and reading about it and doing a bit more internet research, told me that there isn't so many camping options in Hungary, Slovakia. There's campsites dotted around, but they're few and far between, and accommodation's cheaper, basically. So I came to the conclusion that I could take my tent and sleeping bag and ground mat, and that would obviously take up a lot of pannier room, and I might not be using it that much. I've done a few searches as well for what accommodation options were around in Tarifa in southern Spain, and it sounded like there was a lot of like casas, and they were, I guess it's the same thing as like pensions in other European countries, but a house with a room and a sort of modest kitchen, and you could often get somewhere really nice for around €20. And I thought, well, I reckon I can do it through those places, and maybe sort of further in Eastern Europe as well. You could get a modest room for the night for not too much more money than I would be spending on a camping place. So weighing up all the pros and cons, I decided just to not bother with the tent and try and do the cheapest places I could find to actually stay within four walls each night.
Yeah, I agree. I think the difference between, even in the height of the summer, the difference between the cost of a campsite and the cost of a very cheap hostel is pretty minimal. You're talking perhaps no more than €5-10, something like that. So it is worth, in terms of just getting rid of the weight, I suppose, on the bike, it is worth perhaps just abandoning camping altogether. Right, so we've got to, well, kind of the Spanish coast, the east coast of Spain. You're heading up there. Were you aware of the fact that follows the Eurovelo 8 route? Did you see any signs for the Eurovelo 8 north of Valencia?
Yeah, I was aware of it. I didn't see that many signs, one or two maybe, but it seemed like, I had a navigation app on my phone that I was still using quite a lot of the time then. The bit between Valencia and Barcelona didn't seem like it took much planning anyway, because I just had it in my head that I wanted to follow the coast as closely as possible. It was quite densely populated with villages and seaside resorts anyway, not many people around. But these quiet seaside resorts often had cycle paths along the seafront that you could cycle through, and then it'd be quite straightforward to join the dots up between the villages and just carry on cycling around the coast. So it was fairly easy. Sometimes I turned off the navigation app and just thought, well, I'm just going to head with the sea on my right and see how far this cycle path takes me, and then if I've got to go around a little bit of headland, see if there's a road there. It was really quiet. It was really easy to cycle on. It was really flat, so it was sort of enjoyable without needing to seek out cycle paths. I think I was on Eurovelo 8 for some of the time, and other times I might have been on it and not even aware of it. But that sort of bit of the route seemed to plan itself, really.
Yeah, it is nice when you're following the sea because, as you say, you can't really go wrong if you keep the sea on your left or your right, wherever you're going. I suppose the downside is, and this was especially the issue I seem to remember when you approach the French border, it does get quite hilly, up and down, up and down, up and down.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just in a bit of a dilemma what to do about that, really, because the route around the coast sticking to that not only looked hilly, but it looked really busy with traffic as well. And I was constantly trying to do street view on various websites and sort of seeing how many trucks I could spot in sort of a mile radius of going through the sort of street planning, street view thing. And it seemed like there was a busy road that followed the coast and it was hilly and there didn't seem to be any like respite at the edge of the road, not much hard shoulder or not much gap on the sort of right of the white line to sort of get out of the traffic basically. There was another big road further inland, and then the Eurovelo, I guess it was still Eurovelo 8 at that point, led you over a track with no traffic on between those two big main crossing points. And I thought, well, I've got to go with that. But it looks hilly, and I'd read a few things that gave me doubts about the quality of that cycle path and the terrain. But I went for it anyway and thought if I got to get off and push for a bit, that's still preferable than fighting it out with trucks on a sort of busy main road.
So you crossed into France just south of Argelès-sur-Mer, I think. And tell us about the French bit. Again, you were following mostly the coast, weren't you?
Yeah, it was such a contrast. I mean, the route I'd picked to cross the border, it was up a big hill to, I think the crossing point's called Col de Panissères. Probably pronouncing it completely wrong. My French and Spanish is rubbish. The Spanish side going up, it was almost uncyclable for large chunks. There was just sort of huge rocks and I mean, it was beyond potholes. There was like caverns in the road. It was so bad, and it was really steep as well. So I tried cycling as much as I could, but ended up pushing. I got to the border at the top, just marked by a little church, and instantly the cycle path completely changed. It was just smooth tarmac. I mean, you could see it was just like one line where the road was almost non-existent, and then it was just like this smooth tarmac that led down the hill the other side, and it couldn't be more of a contrast. It was almost like the French were showing off with their cycle path, and so it's just like a really easy glide down, and then you hit the sort of slopes at the bottom, and there was more trees and more sort of slightly built up area. You started seeing a few towns, but it was generally still a nice smooth cycle path that took you all the way back to the coast at Arles. After getting to the coast there, it changed back to how it had been between Valencia and Barcelona and heading up the sort of Spanish coast, really. It was a lot more nice seaside resorts, very quiet. It seemed to be a lot of the towns were obviously bustling in the summer and they had loads of restaurants and bars, but most of them would be shut up at this time of year. There was still enough open though. You'd hit a seaside resort with about maybe 50 restaurants and about 4 of them be open, so you'd still have places to eat and get refreshments, and the supermarkets were still open. So it was lovely. Again, the weather wasn't quite so good, but it was still, considering it was February, I mean, it was still lovely to cycle. You don't want it too hot. Nice sort of cool breeze going along the sort of seafront and passing these resorts now and again. So yeah, carried on in the same vein for the next bit.
I think my favourite bit of that stretch of coast from the Spanish border up in the direction of Sète and Montpellier. Did you ride almost off the coast itself along I think they're lagoons that you can follow. Did you follow that path?
Yeah, it was really nice. It was spectacular scenery. I love seeing that, but it was so windy. I'd stepped up the miles I was doing then, and I was really feeling it. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was getting battered going along those lagoons. So it didn't make for the most enjoyable experience in that respect. But yeah, I mean, is a place to cycle. And if you were cycling the other way and you had the wind behind you, I think I'd be marking that down as a highlight as well. As it happened, it was really even though it was flat and you think, well, this should be fairly easy, and it was really nice cycle paths and it was good stuff to see, I was struggling then.
East of Montpellier, you headed inland, and it looks to me from your map that the next place you actually hit the coast was Nice. Is that correct?
It was just before Nice. It was the day before. I headed inland the afternoon from Sète, which you mentioned. Spent 2 nights in Montpellier to get my breath back after that grueling cycle. And then I went slightly further inland to Nîmes and then headed through the countryside there, culminated at Draguignan. Yeah, so that was a nice little place. So that was raining all day when I got to it, so not the best memories in that respect. And then after that, I was going to carry on the Eurovelo, which I think takes you out at Cannes. And just by chance, I was leaving Draguignan and saw signs for another cycle path, which I hadn't read about and didn't know it existed, but I thought, oh, what's this? So I had a look at the sign, and it was taking me along a railway track that looked really nice. It was taking me south and towards the coast a bit sooner than I was planning to hit the coast again. So I thought that looks good. It's downhill and it's flat rather than a big hill out of Draguignan. So I took that, and then that was really nice. It was a really nice day, actually. I fancied a short day. Sun was out, and that took me more or less downhill the whole way, as it often is when you're hitting the coast again. And I came out at a place called Saint Raphael, I think. And then the next day I cycled around the coast from Saint Raphael through Cannes and Antibes and then into Nice that afternoon.
Right, so Nice, now, as we now know, that's where your journey, your cycling journey, had to stop. At what point in the trip were you becoming aware of the COVID-19 problem?
I'd heard it mentioned almost from the start, really. I mean, I was aware that it was happening in China and they were dealing with those issues. When I was in Valencia, my girlfriend flew out for the weekend, and I remember talking about it there, and at the time it still seemed like a distant thing that might not affect us. By the time I'd got through to Montpellier, it had hit Italy. It was in the news quite a lot more. A lot of people were talking about it. I think there'd been a couple of cases, very isolated cases in Montpellier just before I got there. It went to more of the forefront of my mind there, and Montpellier was a week before I got to Nice. So by the time I hit Nice, there was quite a lot of talk about it, and it was definitely becoming more of a worry, in particular because I had to hit northern Italy, sorry. And my original plan was to follow the Eurovelo round the coast into Italy from Nice, and I think you go through Menton, and then you go north from there. And the Eurovelo route that I was thinking of following originally takes you right by the 12 towns in Italy that were worst hit and quarantined pretty early on in the disease spread into Europe. I thought, well, this is almost going to rule out that original plan, but I still thought, well, I'll go into Italy and follow the coast around and go a bit further south and cross Italy. Further south, you had to come out by Venice and do Venice at some point just to get around that bit of coast to get into Slovenia. So I was still planning to do that. And then it obviously spread, unfortunately, in Italy. And I got to Nice on the Saturday afternoon, and I was having sort of serious doubts whether it would be a good idea to cycle into Italy the next morning as I was due to, partly because there was a risk of more areas becoming quarantine. There was talk of that. Obviously, the last thing I wanted to do was go to an infected area a bit flippantly and without sort of any sense of regard for not just my own well-being, but I was thinking, is it a good idea to cycle into somewhere where there's a heavy number of people infected with this virus and then carry on cycling somewhere else? It just seemed like it was less and less of a good idea the more I thought about it. And then on the Sunday morning, the decision was taken out of my hands. I pretty much come to the conclusion that I wouldn't go to Italy. And then the Sunday morning, the whole of northern Italy, first of all, was put into lockdown. And then I think the day after, the whole of Italy completely, not just the northern bit. So the decision was sort of taken out of my hands.
Was it ever an option to head north and then head into Switzerland and access Eastern Europe a little bit further north?
My original plan with cycling into Italy, because the weekend after I'd actually arranged to meet a friend in Nice anyway, and he was flying over and we were going to watch the Paris-Nice cycling race. So I was always going to cycle into Italy for 3 or 4 days and then get the train back to Nice anyway to meet him. With the coronavirus taking hold throughout Italy and other places in Europe, I thought it might be sensible to just wait the week out in Nice and book in there for 8 days and meet my mate when he comes out and watch the cycling and then take stock. So I did that and then thought I'll take this week to think about it and think up the best plans. So I'd actually appealed on Twitter for any ideas and possible alternative routes. And I was coming up with a few ideas myself. There was one option to go north, like you say. I was a bit concerned that the point I got to in the south of France, and I could actually see them. You could see the Alps to the north, and they were all, you could see this big range of snow-covered mountains that looked pretty impossible, if not intimidating, to cycle through, especially with sort of loaded up panniers and a touring bike. So I found a website that told you whether the passes were actually open. I think a lot of it's aimed at sort of skiers and walkers maybe, but a lot of these passes seem to be shut completely and you couldn't pass them. So I was thinking maybe I could go back the way I'd come and find a way further west to get over the Alps. Or a few people suggested as well, and I'd sort of thought about from Nice I could get a ferry down to Corsica and then Corsica into Italy, and this was before the whole of Italy was quarantined and infected by the virus, but sort of cross Italy a lot lower down and then get a ferry into Croatia. But that was sort of soon ruled out when the quarantine area spread in Italy. So then my final plan was to avoid the Alps and to avoid Italy. I would get the train back to around Nîmes, where I'd already cycled the previous week, and then cycle from Nîmes up to Lyon. I didn't think I had enough time to cycle from Lyon to Budapest. I had to be in Budapest in a certain date because I was meeting people and we booked accommodation. I didn't want to let them down. So I thought I'll get the train up from Lyon around to the bottom of Hungary or maybe Slovenia and then resume the cycle from there. And I mentioned earlier that I'd cycled from Glastonbury to Budapest in 2013. I thought, well, this is cheating a bit, but I have cycled that stretch from Lyon to Budapest. So if I miss that out, at least I've done it before and I can resume from Budapest and I'll be arriving in Nordkapp thinking, well, I have cycled every kilometre from Tarifa to Nordkapp. I just haven't done it in one trip, which would be disappointing, but at least I've done it in some form, even if it's over the space of 7 years rather than in one sort of continuous stretch. And I can always go back in the future when things have calmed down and maybe do the Nice to Budapest or Nice to Slovenia section, or cover the Lyon to Budapest bit again and join up the dots basically between the start and the end of the journey. So I was still planning to resume in some form further north, but obviously things escalated again and that didn't happen either.
So when did you come to the conclusion that actually the only option was to return back to Britain?
I'd been in Nice a week, and the situation around Europe had got a lot worse in that time. So I was beginning to think it was less of a good idea and might be more restrictive. I think in that week, Hungary had closed its borders with Slovenia, and Slovakia had closed its borders everywhere. I was planning to cycle through Slovakia, so that was off the cards. I have to find an alternative route. And then I think Poland might have shut its borders as well, and it was beginning to look fairly impossible. I think the only way I might have been able to do it at that stage was to go a lot further west, nearer to the route you did, and resume from there. But when it came to it, I was in Nice I booked to stay in Nice to the Monday, and the Saturday night, all of the pubs and restaurants and non-essential shops were ordered to shut by the French president. So that obviously made things a lot harder. Even if I had decided it was a good idea to cycle through France, it would have made it difficult to stay stocked up on supplies and places to eat, and possibly places to stay. I mean, I anticipated that if France was basically shutting down to tourists and movement was being stopped, that probably hotels and B&Bs wouldn't be taking bookings fairly soon either, or it would certainly make it very difficult. Yeah, I think it was becoming more apparent that it was going to become nigh on impossible.
I can't imagine that the journey from Nice back up to Britain was very easy.
Yeah, it was a bit of a tricky one. I was actually, because as I mentioned earlier, I was planning to go back to near Nîmes and resume the route from there. So I was already booked on this. It was the 6:53 a.m. train from Nice back to near Nîmes. So I thought, well, I'll get that because that's almost on the way. I looked on various websites and all the French railway booking thing. We'd gone into the railway station and asked the chap there for sort of like best route back from Nice to. I was aiming to get to Paris and get a Eurostar, and it seemed like the best way was to get sort of regional trains from Nice to Lyon and then Lyon to Paris. And I had these trains written down, and it all started with this 6:53 out of Nice towards Marseille. And I was booked on that, and I had a bike reservation. I paid €10 extra, and the timetable had a bike symbol on to show that you could take a fully assembled bike rather than one in a bag. So I thought that should be fine. Turned up at Nice station at 6:53 for the train, and they wouldn't let me on the train because it didn't accept bikes, really. I don't know what happened, but the timetable was obviously wrong, and they're only supposed to let you book a bike place on a train that can obviously take bikes, and they let me book a bike place, but I turned up, they wouldn't let me on. So I couldn't get that train. So every other train that I had planned or booked and was planning to take, that fell down for the day because I couldn't have made the connections. There was at that time as well, because a load of trains had been cancelled. A lot of the mainline trains were, you looked at the timetable and it was just cancelled, or a lot of the remaining ones were fully booked. People had, I think, panicked and wanted to book up the remaining spaces on the trains. So to get a train that actually accepted a fully assembled bike and wasn't fully booked and wasn't cancelled, the quickest way I could find to get up to Paris was to go to Toulouse. So I went from Nice to Cannes to Marseille to Toulouse, and then I had to wait 7 hours at Toulouse to get an overnight train from Toulouse to Paris. So I wasn't that excited about the prospect of getting an overnight train, but it seemed like the only option. And then I was in Toulouse station waiting for my train. I think I was there from like 3:00 to about 10:30 at night, and at 7:00 Emmanuel Macron made his speech that the lockdown in France was going to be stepped up, and the speech didn't go into details about what type of border closures there'd be, but he mentioned in agreement with the rest of the EU, there'd be border closures and people would be restricted from travelling within France from 12:00 the next day. This is 10 o'clock at night on the Monday, and I was due to arrive in Paris at 7 the next morning. I hadn't booked a Eurostar. I was conscious that there were so many cancellations and things going wrong, and me being denied access to trains for my bike, that if I didn't make the connection up to Paris, if I booked a Eurostar, I might not be able to make it. So I thought I'll book the Eurostar as close to the last minute as I can when I'm actually in Paris. But after hearing this speech and getting in a panic about what they're talking about, borders being closed, they're talking about people not being able to leave their houses, I need to get out of France. And if people are in my position and they're hearing this as well, there might be floods of people rushing to book the Eurostar to make their exit as well. So before the speech had finished, I was on my phone. I booked a Eurostar the next morning. So getting to Paris was pretty straightforward. I cycled across from one side of Paris to another, and I was actually there a bit early and got on a slightly earlier Eurostars on the 9:13. So a few hours before the lockdown really hit in France and the sort of harsher restrictions took place, I was on the Eurostar back to London, very relieved.
Yeah, that sounds like a real race against time. Just on the Eurostar thing, the Eurostar is famous for not making it easy to take your bike on it. Were they a bit more lenient, bearing in mind the situation in France? Did they make you dismantle your bike, or?
No, it was okay. I was booked on this 11:13 one originally, and I'd rang up from Toulouse to inquire about whether, because I think they only allow two fully assembled bikes on each Eurostar. So I rang up the day before just to test the water and say, like, are there tickets available for the trains? And would they have places for bikes? The bloke on the other end of the line at Euro Dispatch couldn't tell me whether there was spaces for fully assembled bikes, because he said if you're booking a train within 48 hours of it departing, you just have to turn up at the Euro Dispatch at Paris and ask them, and they might be able to take it and they might not. So that's all I could do. And when I did turn up at the station in Paris and asked, I was showing them that I was booked on the 11:13 train, and they said okay. I mean, the guys in the office didn't really speak much English, and I don't really speak much French, so between us we communicated that I was booked on this train, I wanted to take a bike, it was fully assembled, so I paid for the ticket there, and then it was okay. When I went to check in, there was the opportunity for me to get an earlier Eurostar, so I got on it, and then I had to wait in London for 2 hours for the next train that actually had my bike on. But it was fairly smooth other than the logistics of the situation. I mean, I just felt lucky at that point to get myself on a train and out of France and get my bike on a train a couple of hours later. So it was okay. It wasn't too bad. It was easier to get the bike and myself on a Eurostar and back to England than it was to get from Nice to Paris with the bike in the previous sort of day and a half.
So finally, are you ever going to go back to Nice and complete your Tarifa to Nordkapp cycle?
I'd love to be able to think so. It might be difficult. It's taken a number of years to get to this point where it's been a suitable point in my life, and it fitted in with other plans and finances and employment and all of this stuff to get the window of opportunity to do it once. I'd like to think so. It's difficult, obviously, as you know, it's very weather dependent on when you can actually finish in Nordkapp. So I think for this summer to realistically start cycling again and hit the top of Norway at a time where it's not snowing and you can actually like physically get a touring bike up there is maybe unlikely. Possibly this time next year, but it depends. I mean, it seems like and I'm sure a lot of people in the same boat or in a much worse situation than me, but I find myself back in England now and we're locked down for a few weeks and I haven't got any work. So the money that I'd set aside and time I'd set aside for the cycle tour is being spent back in England now. So we see. I'd love to do it one day, even if it's in 20 years' time or something. But we'll see. I'll have to just keep hoping and look for opportunity.
Well, I hope one day you do get the chance to finish the ride, because I think, especially choosing the route that you've chosen, it will be a really interesting experience. And like you said, there's no rush, is there? You could do it next year, you could do it in 5 years, you could do it in 20 years. The fact that you've still got it in mind to do at some point is a very positive thing.
Yeah, well, I think you got to cling on to what positivity and optimism you can manage at the moment. So I mean, I'd absolutely love the 6 weeks that I did manage to cycle, and the territory I cycled through and those countries, and it is a wonderful experience. And I feel really lucky to have got that opportunity while I could, and appreciate the fact that some people might not get that chance to see those places. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for what I've managed to do. I had a great time doing it, and then, like you say, hopefully it'll be completed one day. But I don't want to get my hopes up too much and be disappointed. But I'd love to be able to finish it. Yeah.
Well, at least, like most people in Britain, most people in Europe, and a lot of people around the world, we've got a lot of time over the next few months to plan future bike trips.
Yeah, you got to dream about it and look forward to the future. Also, try and take the opportunity to focus on the good times that I've had, and maybe I'll carry on writing up the blogs for your website, and maybe do a bit more writing in depth now. Try and sort out my photos, and remember the happy 6 weeks I did have cycling through Spain and France.
Yeah, and just picking up on that point, if you go to cyclingeurope.org, you can read the first two parts of what will probably be, I don't know, 3 or 4 parts of Paul's journey from Tarifa to Nordkapp. Currently on there you can read about Spain Part 1 and Spain Part 2, and hopefully at some point in the next few weeks, perhaps also about the French section of the trip. And then, who knows, in a year, in 5 years, in 20 years, we can also read about the rest of the trip from Nice to northern Norway and Nordkapp. So good luck with that. Thank you for speaking to the podcast, and happy cycling.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and happy cycling to yourself when you get the opportunity to go out again, hopefully in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you.